at chapter 3 here, and we're going to kind of run through it. This goes a little beyond the questions that you had, because the questions you had are kind of, hey, basic reading comprehension. What can you tell me? I want to make sure that we understand some of what Fitzgerald is doing here in the chapter as well. The chapter opens with a 2-page description of what Gatsby's parties are like. Some things that we want to point out about that description. It is lavish. Notice that he'll talk about like the buffet table where the food is. And rather than just saying, hey, there's lots of food there, he goes on about every single type of food that's present. There's hams and turkeys and this and that. When he's talking about drinks, it's not just, hey, there's lots. He goes through a whole list because we want to hit on the expensive quality of this. It is over the top. We also notice that it is awfully colorful in how it's described. This is bright and vibrant. Mostly, and what has to be undercut in all of this description is that time and again, Nick hits on the fact that most of the people that come to this party aren't invited. And so just for a second, process that. Gatsby is spending all of this money, going to all of this effort. And even we talk about the crew of workers that come in ahead and behind the party for people he doesn't even know. And so it gets us again to still wonder, what is the deal with this guy? We've heard these rumors about him. These rumors are even going to persist at the party that he's throwing. And so we're building this mystery of who Gatsby is here as we start the 3rd chapter. Nick points out that opposed to all these people that aren't, he actually is invited, that a butler comes with a formal invitation for him. Think about what that tells us about Nick and about Gatsby. Nick lives next door, and he is watching this party happen where people just show up, but he chooses not to join them. It says something about him in that he's not looking to take advantage of his neighbor. He has this sense of courtesy. You know, I understand I just don't go if I'm not invited. But think about, too, that Gatsby here is specifically inviting him. So that tells us Gatsby probably notices Nick, notices that Nick isn't attending, and as we're going to soon find out, he wants something. So Nick goes to the party, and as he first comes into the party, he's looking for Gatsby. But who does he run into? Jordan. And so this is the same girl that we introduced in chapter 1, who's the professional golfer, who seemingly has her nose up in the air at all points. Can you get the door? And so here, as he runs into Jordan Baker, he feels as though he needs to attach himself to someone. Need to be here on time. He feels as though he needs to attach himself to someone rather than just wandering this party. And so as he attaches to Jordan, they meet up with a group of people and they start to talk about an incident with a dress. This girl had attended a previous Gatsby party, tore her dress on a chair, and Gatsby sends her a more expensive dress through the mail to replace it. They say that Gatsby does this because he doesn't want what? He doesn't want problems. He doesn't want trouble. They all talk about Gatsby here, and they start to create these rumors. This story kicks off this idea about, he doesn't want problems with anybody. They throw out a rumor about Gatsby, and they say that he was what? Good job. They say he was a German spy in the war. Now, in the previous chapter, we talked about how they try these rumors about him being a cousin of the Kaiser. And we said that was the German leader in World War I. And so here, we have these rumors. Notice that they're only more blatant because these people are sitting at Gatsby's party, drinking Gatsby's booze, eating Gatsby's food, and none of them were invited except for Nick. And they still want to talk trash about him. And they end it with this phrase. They say, you look at him sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking at him, and they say, I'll bet he. Anybody finish it? Anybody remember what it is that they think about him? This one's a little tougher, so I'm going to fill it for you. Yeah. They say, I bet he killed a man. I want this image of that look to stick in your head, because it's going to be brought back up a number of times, that when people look at Gatsby at times, they seem to find a look that it's like he killed somebody. There's a hardness to him, and we're going to contrast that in just a moment. So they give you that. Jordan and Nick decide to go off and find Gatsby, and instead they run into a guy that they call Owl Eyes. He does not have bird eyes. Instead, he's wearing round glasses, and if you look at my glasses and you look at my face, you notice that because of my lenses and my type of vision, my eyes actually look smaller than they actually are. Imagine that's because I am nearsighted. I can't see far away. But if I was farsighted, if I couldn't see up close, you would see the opposite in the glasses that I wear. My eyes would be magnified. So when they see this Owl Eyes guy, he's wearing really round glasses, and they magnify the size of his eyes. So he kind of looks like an owl. He's sitting in the library. What's he amazed by? Yeah. And even more so, he talks about the fact that the books are real. Now, I know students have trouble with this part because they're like, but it's a library. Like, why would he be amazed that the books are real? I guess he's just drunk. Have you ever seen decorator books? You can actually buy, they're sized to a shelf, and it's a whole thing. It's like a box. So there's no books or anything. You just slide this box onto a bookcase, and it looks like, hey, look, I have a whole shelf full of books. Remember that this is also 1922. And so these are nice, expensive, leather-bound books. And so he's amazed at the price, at the amount, at the fact that they're real. And he even talks about they didn't even cut the pages out. They didn't even do any of these things. I just want you to think for a second. Do you think Gatsby has read any of these books? Think about, we know that pretty much because of the descriptions of the party. We see that Gatsby is willing to spend huge amounts of money on people he doesn't know. And here we're seeing he's spending huge amounts of money to get this exact reaction. Wow, look at all these books. He must be a real person. There's a little bit here. And so think about how we use those questions about why and so what to get there. We didn't just go, okay, this is a weird story with a drunk guy. We had to ask ourselves, all right, why is he amazed? What's so great about this? And then we had to go, so what? Even if we could tell ourselves, hey, the books haven't been read, or hey, there's a lot to it. That second so what question gets us to go, why is this in the book? Why does this get 2 pages worth of text roughly, or a page and a half or so? Why do we get all that for this stupid little incident? Because we can see it developing something about this guy. And so as we're reading, think about these questions as ways to help you to figure out why things are being mentioned. We've used them so far, but if we can be a little more intentional, it can help us. Finally, Nick meets Gatsby. As they meet, the first thing they talk about tells us that they have something in common. Like Nick, Gatsby is what? A veteran. Now they mention the kind of divisions that they were in, and he says, I thought your face looked familiar. Don't get confused to think that these two have met previously, as much as it's kind of the familiarity of soldiers. It's the familiarity of this. Imagine that you were somewhere further away and you met somebody that was also from Texas and they were like, oh, I grew up in Haltom City. And you start to recognize small things that kind of tell you, oh, yeah, there is that familiar quality. Like, I see your buffalo pin, or I got this or that. I think look at it more in that way with what Gatsby sees in him. What does he keep calling Nick? Anybody understand that? Or was anybody just annoyed? Anybody ever go to buy a car with their parents? Or maybe you went yourself to buy a car? Okay, so simple tricks that you need to learn, because guess what? You're likely going to be in the market for a car at some point soon. Car salesmen, expensive item salesmen, anything like that, understand that the relationship is often what makes the difference. They get that they're not just selling you a product, but hopefully they're selling a part of themselves to you, that you're making the choice to buy it from them. And so there are little tricks that they will do. For example, they will try to learn your name very quickly. And then they will continue to use your name as they talk to you, so that it seems like they're not just a salesman, they're your friend. Often people will do this trick with new friends to make them feel comfortable. Notice that Gatsby continues to call Nick old sport time and time again, even though they've just met. It creates this familiarity and comfort between the two that's not real. Nick focuses on one quality about Gatsby that stands out to him. He says it makes Nick feel comfortable. It makes it feel like Gatsby's focusing on you for this split second. Did anybody pick that up? He points out Gatsby's smile. It kind of goes with the old sport thing. They are ways that are simple. You can smile at anybody. You can call anybody old sport, and all of a sudden it makes it seem like, hey, look, we're good friends. Think about how this quality that Nick points out goes against this look that everybody talks about. Everybody says that it's like Gatsby has killed a man by this hard look that he has, but then Nick says, nah, there's that smile of his. Oh. They make some plans, and then Gatsby goes away, and Nick watches him from afar. And there are two things that stand out to Nick as he watches him. This is right at where we're going to pick up. Anybody tell me one of the two things that stand out to him watching Gatsby from afar? All right, I'll give you the tougher one. Number one, he doesn't drink. Nick says it stands out so starkly because everybody at this party is drinking. There's so much alcohol everywhere, yet the host isn't. And then towards the end of the paragraph, he notices a second thing about Gatsby. He's alone. I just want you to think for a second. If you're hosting a giant party like this, if everybody's having a good time, and if you're a guy, what would you expect that host to be just surrounded by? Huh? Yes, but specifically? Huh? Girls. You know it. They, oh my gosh, he's so rich. Oh my gosh, he's so nice. Thank you for having me here. Ah. And he says, nah, nobody's falling back into Gatsby's arms. Nobody's head is on Gatsby's shoulder. Like, it's weird. It's weird to see this guy that has done all of this. And yet, no. Nick's also struck in this moment, and it's why he's so weirded out by Gatsby, because it's like, he's my age. Like, how's he have all this money? How's he doing all this? Like, I didn't ever expect somebody like me to be living in that house. No. It's weird to him. And so he's going to want some answers, and this is going to help us to kind of propel forward in later chapters. We're going to start here on page 55. We're going to work together for just a little bit. I'm going to give you some time to scan and read some pages about the end of the party. And then we are going to talk more specifically about Nick. And so we leave off here at the quote that says, "I beg your pardon." That's where we're going to start. Nick has watched Gatsby from afar. He has commented on these two things about him, and then they get interrupted here. "I beg your pardon." Gatsby's butler was suddenly standing beside us. "Miss Baker?" he inquired. "I beg your pardon, but Mr. Gatsby would like to speak to you alone." "With me?" she exclaimed in surprise. "Yes, ma'am." She got up slowly, raising her eyebrows at me in astonishment, and followed the butler toward the house. I noticed that she wore her evening dress, all her dresses, like sports clothes. There was a jauntiness about her movements, as if she had first learned to walk upon golf courses on clean, crisp mornings. I was alone, and it was almost 2. For some time, confused and intriguing sounds had issued from a long, many-windowed room which overhung the terrace. Eluding Jordan's undergraduate, who is now engaged in ostensible conversation with 2 chorus girls, and who implored me to join him, I went inside. The large room was full of people. One of the girls in yellow was playing the piano, and beside her stood a tall, red-haired young lady from a famous chorus engaged in song. She drank a quantity of champagne, and during the course of her song, she decided ineptly that everything was very, very sad. She was not only singing, she was weeping too. Whenever there was a pause in the song, she filled it with gasping, broken sobs, and then took up the lyric again in a quavering soprano. The tears coursed down her cheeks. Not freely, however, for when they came into contact with her heavily beaded eyelashes, they assumed an inky color and pursued the rest of their way in slow, black rivulets. A humorous suggestion was that she sing the notes on her face, whereupon she threw up her hands, sank into a chair, and went off into a deep, vinous sleep. "She had a fight with a man who says he's her husband," explained a girl at my elbow. I looked around. Most of the remaining women were now having fights with men said to be their husbands. Even Jordan's party, the quartet from East Egg, were rent asunder by dissension. One of the men was talking with curious intensity to a young actress, and his wife, after attempting to laugh at the situation in a dignified and indifferent way, broke down entirely and resorted to flank attacks. At intervals, she appeared suddenly at his side like an angry diamond and hissed, "You promised!" into his ear. As Nick wanders here at this party, notice how quickly Fitzgerald is able to create an image in your head of a character. Much like previously in the chapter with Owl Eyes, he focuses on a specific image that he wants you to connect with it. Tell me about the girl in the red dress. What's the image you're going to have based on her? Yeah, she's crying and there's makeup going down her face, and people make a joke that she should sing the notes on her face. Think about how much of an image that is, how stark that is. It's going to stick with you. He does this masterfully to give you these little bits on people that really don't matter. I'm going to give you a chance to kind of read the end of this party silently to yourself. Now, don't look for every last detail. You notice that today's question asks you about what do Nick and Ally see? I'm going to tell you, it's a car accident. I want you instead to not worry about every detail about the car accident, but I want you to look for the humor in it. These people are drunk, and it becomes, as the party goes on, this kind of loose affair. And so look for some of the humor in how Fitzgerald is showing this. We're going to go all the way to page 61 in your text, in this little section where you're just going to skim the text, look and see what you get. We're going to stop where it says reading over what I've written so far. And that's where we're going to pick back up together. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. to take a look there. Maybe not even that. We'll go 7 minutes. At 8 o'clock, top of the hour, we're going to come back together. You're going to be at page 61 at reading over, and we're going to pick up there. everybody had a chance to look at those pages up to 61. So if we're going to highlight anything, notice that as they leave the party, Nick runs into Jordan again, and she talks about how when she was pulled to talk to Gatsby, she has heard the most amazing story. But she's like, I can't tell you. Oh my gosh. She's going to tell him in chapter 4. And so we're getting there, but we're picking up that mystery bit. We started the chapter with all this, oh, who's Gatsby? Oh, what's the deal? And even when we meet him, that's not enough for Nick. He's still wondering. And here we get that tease. Jordan knows something, but she's like, oh, I can't tell you yet. She's going to. And then, of course, this accident is meant to be just absurd. It's so ridiculous. It's so over the top. Literally, there's a wheel off the car, and they don't understand why they can't keep driving. It's stupid. It's okay. Nick's going to take a break here. Most of the time in the books, when they present this, there is a large break in the text, so that you can see that Nick is kind of stopping the main story of this chapter, the party, to kind of give us a little more context. And so we're going to pick up where it starts reading over what I've written so far. He says, I see I've given the impression that the events of 3 nights, several weeks apart, were all that absorbed me. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded summer. And until much later, they absorbed me infinitely less than my personal affairs. So here, Nick's telling you, ho, ho, ho. I get that so far each chapter has a major focus. And they're little things. He's like, but I did a whole lot more with my life during the summer. As we hear him talk here in the next couple of paragraphs, I want you to think, did he? Most of the time I worked. In the early morning, the sun threw my shadow westward as I hurried down the white chasms of lower New York to the Probity Trust. I knew the other clerks and young bond salesmen by their first names and lunched with them in dark, crowded restaurants on little pig sausages and mashed potatoes and coffee. I even had a short affair with a girl who lived in Jersey City and worked in the accounting department. But her brother began throwing mean looks in my direction. So when she went on her vacation in July, I let it blow quietly away. I took dinner usually at the Yale Club. For some reason, it was the gloomiest event of my day. And then I went upstairs to the library and studied investments and securities for a conscientious hour. Bless you. There were generally a few rioters around, but they never came into the library. So it was a good place to work. After that, if the night was mellow, I strolled down Madison Avenue past the old Murray Hill Hotel and over 33rd Street to the Pennsylvania Station. Okay, so think for a second. 2 paragraphs. Is Nick telling us the truth? Did he do a whole lot else in the summer? No, not really. I mean, you could argue, yeah, he did. He went to work and he had lunch with people he worked with. And he did. Can you tell me a single person's name? Think, if this is your story, you're here every day, right? If you were like, oh, there's other stuff that happened within my school year, could you tell me the names of the people that you have lunch with? Yeah. Could you give me details beyond I went and studied at night at this place? That's boring. This guy wants to make it seem like, oh, I had a life, and we're going, you don't. He says, I began to like New York, the racy, adventurous feel of it at night, and the satisfaction that the constant flicker of men and women and machines gives to the restless eye. I like to walk up Fifth Avenue and pick out romantic women from the crowd and imagine that in a few minutes I was going to enter into their lives and no one would ever know or disapprove. Sometimes in my mind, I followed them to their apartments on the corners of hidden streets, and they turned and smiled back at me before they faded through a door into warm darkness. At the enchanted metropolitan twilight, I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes and felt it in others. Poor young clerks who loitered in front of windows, waiting until it was time for a solitary restaurant dinner. Young clerks in the dusk, wasting the most poignant moments of night and life. Okay, people get really freaked out by this paragraph because they go, he follows girls home? Notice that he says he imagines. Don't get freaked out by this. This is no different than if you were walking through a crowd as a young, straight guy and you were just like, ooh, she's hot. What if she paid attention to me and smiled at me? What if, I saw her at that moment before she went home and she smiled at me? That's all he's doing. This imagining only helps to highlight what he says after that. The loneliness in the city. Notice that he doesn't acknowledge his own loneliness. He says he sees other people who are lonely and he feels that loneliness. But when we read, is he lonely? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He says again at 8 o'clock when the dark lanes of the 40s were 5 deep with throbbing taxi cabs bound for the theater district, I felt a sinking in my heart. Forms leaned together in the taxis as they waited, and voices sang, and there was laughter from unheard jokes, and lighted cigarettes outlined unintelligible gestures inside. Imagining that I too was hurrying toward gaiety and sharing their intimate excitement, I wished them well. For a while, I lost sight of Jordan Baker. And then in midsummer, I found her again. At first, I was flattered to go places with her because she was a golf champion and everyone knew her name. Then it was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. The bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. And one day I found what it was. When we were on a house party together up in Warwick, she left a borrowed car out in the rain with the top down and then lied about it. And suddenly I remembered the story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. At her first big golf tournament, there was a row that nearly reached the newspapers, a suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. The thing approached the proportions of a scandal, then died away. A caddy retracted his statement, and the only other witness admitted that he might have been mistaken. The incident and the name had remained together in my mind. Okay, so back in chapter 1, when Nick was like, Jordan Baker, there was a story he couldn't remember, and here it finally comes back to him. She's a cheater. She's a liar. And he sees it illustrated. Think about this. You borrow your friend's car. It's a convertible. You leave it out in the rain, and then you're like, I didn't do that. You didn't do that? How could you? No, the water just found its way into the car. She's a liar. Notice what Nick's going to say about her. Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men. Okay, let's stop. What does that say about Nick? If Jordan tends to avoid clever men, but she's hanging around Nick, what's that say about Nick? Yeah, it's basically like him admitting, oh, well, I want you to hear this voice and how Nick is going to talk coming up here. You probably know this guy. Oh, I know she's cheated in every other relationship. But you know that guy, or you know that person. So I want you to hear Nick here when he's like, oh, she avoids clever, shrewd men. It's like, I'm smart. Don't worry. Like, I'm the exception. And now I say this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. She was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage, and given this unwillingness, I suppose she began dealing in subterfuges, lies, when she was very young, in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. It made no difference to me. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. I was casually sorry, then I forgot. Hold up and process that last sentence. Dishonesty is a thing in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. Why would you not blame a woman for being dishonest, in Nick's opinion? Would you blame a person for having hair? Why? because everybody has hair. So reread that sentence. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. Nick's essentially saying all women lie, so you really can't blame them for lying. Okay, Nick. All right, we're going to go back to statement second. It was on that same house party that we had a curious conversation about driving a car. It started because she passed so close to some workmen that our fender flicked a button on one man's coat. You're a rotten driver, I protested. Either you ought to be more careful or you ought to drive at all. I am careful. No, you're not. Well, other people are, she said lightly. What's that got to do with it? They'll keep out of my way. It takes two to make an accident. But suppose you met someone just as careless as yourself. I hope I never will, she answered. I hate careless people. That's why I like you. Is that a compliment? I would call it a backhanded compliment. Let me rephrase it. What if I said, I hate ugly people. That's why I like you. Am I saying you're attractive? I'm saying you're not ugly, but I'm not saying that you're attractive. It's a backhanded compliment. It seems complimentary. Oh, I don't like careless people. That's why I like you. This is a really weird relationship. It's only going to get worse. Her gray, sun-strained eyes stared straight ahead, but she deliberately shifted our relations. And for a moment, I thought I loved her. But I'm slow thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desire. And I knew it that first I had to get myself definitely out of that tankle back home. I've been writing letters once a week and signing them, Love, Nick. And all I could think of was how, when that certain girl played tennis, a faint mustache of perspiration appeared on her upper lip. Nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactfully broken off before I was free. Okay, so Nick says here to start it that when she says this comment about liking him because she hates careless people, he goes, I thought I loved her. Whoa, dude. And then he brings up this other girl. He says, oh yeah, I guess before I go with her, I'd have to get out of that thing back home. Notice what he says about that girl back home. He says he's writing her letters and he's signing that he loves her. But what's the first thing that comes to his mind when he thinks about her? That when she plays tennis, what happens? Yeah, sweat collects on her upper lip. Okay, I want you to think for a second. What would that highlight? This is weird because most of us want to assume, nuh-uh. Guess what? All girls have hair on their face. They just bleach it or do something with it. They make it look like it's not there, but they do. And so Nick's essentially saying that I signed these letters, love Nick, and when I think about her, all I can think about is her mustache that appears when she sweats. Is that a compliment? No! And so again, here we have this guy that thinks he loves this girl, but he shouldn't. He signs these letters, love Nick back home, but he clearly doesn't. And look at how he ends the chapter. Everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I'm one of the few honest people that I've ever known. He's not honest about anything. Go back to the very beginning of the book. He opened the book by telling you one thing. I don't judge people. Does he judge Jordan? Does he judge women in general? Think about how he deals with this girl back home. Now, it's easy to throw a rock at Nick and go, man, he's full of himself. What a liar. He thinks he's so great. Take a step back, though, and breathe, and then go, are we any different? Is there anybody in here that would look and go like, I'm not an honest person? We all would like to be seen as honest people. We would. But then it's really easy to find the hypocrisies in that. We can point out the moments that, well, you said this, or well, you did this, or hey, you acted like this. Nick's just like all of us. And so don't beat him up for it. But notice here that we're seeing these trends in him. And we're going to continue to point them out as we go. All right. We are tight on time. So if you take a second